on the meeting toolbar next to the audio button, or you can type your questions into the chat box. Should you have any questions about CEUs, you can contact me. Please take a moment at the conclusion of the seminar to complete our brief evaluation. The evaluation will be sent to your email address immediately after the seminar. It is really helpful as we plan for upcoming seminars. Now, to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Scott Tomczyk is an associate professor at the Weisskopf Child Evaluation Center at the University of Louisville in the School of Medicine in the Department of Pediatrics. The title of the seminar is Collaborating with Individuals with ASD and Their Families, an Occupational Therapist View. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Tomczyk.
Scott. How are you? Welcome. Glad you all could join us this afternoon, either via technology or live. We have a lot more information in the handout than we will spend some time with this afternoon. We'll go through some of the slides pretty quickly. We have created a PDF upload that you all can upload if you want a copy of the slides we'll go over today. So we will just jump right on into things today. All right, here we go. When you registered, you saw objectives. I think the overall goal for us today is to really understand developmental screening and surveillance, what it means for diagnosis for ASD, what that criteria is, and then spend some time going over practice guidelines from an occupational therapy perspective, and how it really relates to early childhood, how it relates to school performance, participation, work, all of those aspects. And then also try to provide somewhat of a framework on how we can use evidence, whether it be that we'll talk about today that's specific to occupational therapy systematic reviews, but then how we bridge that review with other well-utilized evidence-based guidelines. Okay. So if we start out just talking about developmental surveillance, surveillance is flexible. It's this ongoing process through which healthcare professionals identify children who have developmental concerns. Very different than screening. Surveillance happens at pretty much every visit. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that this surveillance be incorporated into every well-child preventative care visit. In addition to those, most and many pediatricians actually incorporate it into all visits so that we're really sure that we're tracking development and watching developmental growth in children. The link on the screen is to the Center for Disease Control website. Provides a lot of information on what the AAP recommends from a screening perspective. So here's your first opportunity to kind of engage with us today. If we're gonna look at developmental surveillance, which of the following developmental surveillance should include all of the following except which of these items? So I want you to take a minute and answer this question for yourself. And if everyone's brave enough to chat, answer, feel free. But developmental surveillance from physicians should include all the following except it's that screening measure. Screening and surveillance are oftentimes considered synonymous when we look at tracking development, but they're really two separate processes. Surveillance really encourages healthcare professionals to ask parents about their concerns, obtain a developmental history, make some observations of the child during that visit, and then also identify what either risk factors can impact the story, the narrative you're hearing from the family, and if there are protective factors in place. So identifying all of those factors is a key part of routine surveillance. in contrast to screening, which is more of a standard process where an actual instrument is used during well checks. Again, here's an opportunity for you to test your knowledge. When does the AAP recommend that these screenings be done? 6-12, 24-30, 9-18, 24-30, all of the above, 3-6-12. Typical routine, 9-18, and then 24 or 30-month well visits, depending on which schedule the primary care provider puts the child on, is recommended. Those are the recommended ages. There's much debate about the 3 to 6. Many feel like at that really early age, there's so few items on these screening measures that we would ask and want children to be demonstrating that screening as early as 3 months or as early as 6 months is maybe too early for a standardized test or a screening measure. The American Academy of Pediatrics also recommends multiple measures, and so looks at ages and stages as one of its recommended measures, and that's the measure that's used a lot here in Kentucky. If we look at then autism and early diagnosis, the key differential component that we need to look at is this social skill, social impairment. It's really the core and defining symptom of autism in especially young children. Babies are social. I mean, they're social from infancy on. Even children with other developmental disabilities at a very early age are very, very social. And so if there's a disturbance in that social skill, that's really the critical finding. That's where we get a little bit more concerned. And in early children, early in development, this may present as lack of or poor use of eye gaze. And so if we look at infants at a really early age, and you're taking that bottle you've just prepared and you put it in the microwave to heat it up real quick, and the mom or dad pulls that bottle out of the microwave, and the child is looking at the bottle, looking at mom, looking at the bottle, looking at mom. So they're using this eye gaze to communicate, like, come on, hurry up, I really want that bottle, let's go. Children on the autism spectrum oftentimes don't demonstrate that use of eye gaze to communicate as early as they should. They also oftentimes lack shared enjoyment. And so at a real early age too, children, when they start to set up, you build a big tower and you knock it over, and the kids think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and they laugh and hoot and holler and look at you and share that enjoyment with you. That's often, the frequency of that is markedly reduced. Joint attention is really being considered that hallmark early social skill that is one of the defining factors diagnostically. And joint attention is a triangle of interaction. And so I like to think about it as it's an interaction with two people and an object around social purpose. And so early in development, children sitting outside. I live in Louisville full time, and so there's UPS planes flying over all the time. So joint attention in young children, that UPS plane flies over, and the infant, toddler looks at the plane, looks at mom, looks at plane, looks at mom, like without words, is communicating with their eyes. Socially, this triangle of interaction, and that's joint attention. And the frequency of occurrence, or the frequency with which children demonstrate joint attention, is markedly reduced in children with autism. If we look at overall interaction, families will tell us early on, Johnny seems to be in his own little world. He prefers to play on his own. These are all real early indicators. And I think some have a misconception as well that It's just the verbal communication that is lacking or delayed there in younger children. But really, it's both. It's that verbal and nonverbal communication. There are lots of children who have communication delays. So take children with childhood apraxia of speech, for instance. They may not have words to verbally communicate, but non-verbally they communicate all over the place with use of eye gaze, with gestures, with pointing. But younger toddlers, individuals with autism don't demonstrate that interaction. I just want to be sure that everyone has seen the website for the First Signs project.
You want me to bring that up?
Yeah, so if you can bring that up. So this website was recently moved to the Autism Navigator component of the Autism Speaks website. And I love the videos because it will show you side-by-side videos of children. And we're not going to play them here, just given the technology and buffering and showing a video through the web and then sending it out through the web, the audio and video quality would not be good. But this used to be called the First Signs website. Like I said, now it's in Autism Speaks in their Autism Navigator component. But it shows you what very early presentation of typical development from a social communication standpoint is versus children who have autism and who later went on to develop autism. And so this is a great resource to use in presentations or just to hone in on your own skills to get a better understanding of what these really early indicators are and what they look like. The videos are great and really helpful. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if we look then at autism screening, the AAP also recently added that in addition to the routine screening, routine developmental screening, there should be some specific screening for autism. And it should be done at 18 and 24-month well checks. If the child is on the 24 to 30-month schedule, then 30. But in addition to regular screening, there should be some specific ASD screening at those visits and at visits if there are risk factors for autism, like there is a brother, sister, or other family member with an autism spectrum disorder, or if part of that developmental surveillance and screening concerns ASD, red flags are raised. In Kentucky, First Steps Early Intervention Program, and we'll talk about that in a minute, has implemented some really recent changes in terms of how screening is implemented. If you look at then all of developmental screening, developmental surveillance, and the specific ASD screening, if you go to the Center for Disease Control website, the link that was on one of the earlier slides, this screening guideline for ASD is on that website. Just kind of walks through what pediatricians should be doing. And I think this is a great resource for families because I think we often hear later in development, so children referred for diagnostic evaluation after the age of 3 or later. I think things are much better than they used to be, but still you hear stories about, I've been concerned since Johnny was 18 months or 12 months. and I was told he was a boy and he'll talk when he's ready. Don't worry about it. So this is another really good kind of resource to help families, because many of these materials are out on the web, free, and families can move forward. If we look at first steps here in Kentucky, really recently, in response to really low child find numbers, back in 2011, so just 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there were 8 children identified as having autism in First Steps for a program that provides services to, at minimum, 6,000 children a year. So that 8 number was pretty alarming given prevalence. Okay. Question was, are there supposed to be slides up? So,
Are you seeing slides? I'm seeing slides. I see slides. I see them. They all see slides.
I see
Okay.
slides.
Okay, so it looks like we're okay there. I'll let tech support figure out what's going on with Janet. I don't know if, okay. So it really, in response to that, the state has been very aggressive from a First Steps perspective in trying to build capacity statewide. And so back in 2013, there were a series of trainings where First Steps providers were trained on early signs of autism. Service coordinators were provided some really distinct training on how to administer the MCHAT, or Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then look at how, with this built capacity, do we really target screening within the program? How do we look at early diagnosis to allow for early diagnosis to early intervention? And so what the state did, it's been about a year now. If at the time of referral to First Steps, rather than moving forward with an eligibility determination for developmental delay, the state lead agency decided to really sort out this diagnostic issue first. And so prior to determining the child eligible with developmental delay and moving forward to an IFSP, the state changed procedure and policy a bit, and so that children get screening up front. So they're getting a level 1 screening with the Modified Checklist for Autism in toddlers, and if that child, if that screening score is at risk, they're moving forward with a level 2 screening, the screening tool for autism in toddlers and young children. We'll talk about both these instruments real briefly, just so you have an understanding of them if you're not familiar with it. To really determine which children should move forward with a diagnostic evaluation very early on, so that we can then establish eligibility with that established risk condition of autism spectrum disorder if the child meets criteria, and then move forward with writing an IFSP that really uses the evidence and targets the interventions that are effective, that we know are effective for young children with autism. Susan, I know that I was recently in, the question was whether the same protocol is used in other states, and it's not. We just had our national conference, the American Occupational Therapy Association conference last week, and we presented some early data on this new process. Using screening with the MCHAT and the STAT and how it relates to development at the time of diagnosis and sensory processing patterns. And there was not another state, even regionally. So I talked specifically to people from Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, and Tennessee who thought it was great that Kentucky had moved forward with implementing. And I agree. I think we are being progressive. It's good to bring Kentucky's usually in those later numbers. When we're talking about teen smoking and obesity, where Kentucky's usually 49. So this is, we're being a little bit cutting edge here. So this is great. And I think that if you look at the OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, Kentucky is one of the few states recently that's met all criteria and met standards. So from an EI perspective. So the process for eligible children is similar. So children may start first step services and have speech delay, or may have another kind of delay. And down the road, there's concern for autism raised. They also get level 1 and level 2 screening before moving on to that diagnostic evaluation. So the state's been real conscious about targeting those areas. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here going through these screening measures, but I want to just kind of give you a survey overview of them so you have an understanding of why they're used and have an understanding of kind of what they ask. So the MCHAT is a level 1. And the RF stands for revised with follow-up questions or follow-up interview. It's a revision of the original MCHAT. Used to be 23 items, it's now 20. There were 3 items that were not the least sensitive were removed, and the language was simplified. And some of the early studies found that there was some bias in order of questions, so that if you answered one question where you were concerned, families automatically move forward answering with concern, and so they reordered the items. You'll see a link on the bottom. It's kind of hard to see, but if you go to mchat.org, there is an online module. I don't need to share. I'm not going to share this one. Oh, okay. So mchat.org, it is an online screening. So families can fill it out. It scores it. And so families can also go about getting this screening. It's free, shareware, it's out there. So you have a survey, just kind of an understanding of questions. Again, we highlighted the social communication piece earlier. So, if we look at like items 6 and 7, does your child point with one finger to ask for something, which is different than showing you something, which is asked in question 7. The red items mean that it's a yes response instead of a no response. Does your child turn their head to look at something? Does your child turn around to look and see what you're looking at? So getting at some of these directing attention and how you can direct attention of the child with your eyes. Again, 20 questions, quick, down and dirty, yes, no response from families. If the child has an at-risk score, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute, they recommend that the follow-up questions be asked. Okay, and the follow-up questions really give you a narrative, and it increases the specificity of the instrument. And so, if you failed item 3, does Johnny play, pretend, or make believe? And so the service coordinator or whoever's administering the follow-up questions would ask the family to give them an example of his or her pretend play. And if the family can't, there's a script. Does he ever pretend to eat from a toy spoon or fork? Does he ever pretend to talk on a telephone? So that in the end, you can get this pass-fail, which is used to score and determine where the child goes from that point forward. So if on the MCHAT-R, the child has less than 3 failures, routine surveillance is recommended. If there's a total score of 3 failed items between 3 and 7, is really when you want to go through and administer the follow-up questions. And if there's still 2 item failures, the child should be referred for diagnostic evaluation and move forward to really sort out whether a child is on the autism spectrum or not. However, up front, so if up front you ask the 20 questions in the MCHAT-R and the child has a total score of 8 or more, they should be referred for both diagnostic evaluation and early intervention. And so it's just wanted to give you an overview of the instrument psychometrically. The revised, especially with follow-up questions, has higher predictive value and better specificity for autism when the follow-up questions are used. If the follow-up questions are not used, it's really more of a broadband screening measure to show that children have developmental delays, and in particular some social communication delays. If we look at level 2 screening, then using the screening tool for autism in 2-year-olds, recently changed its name to screening tool for autism in toddlers and young children. It's a level 2 screener, so it's specific to autism. So it's designed specifically for children who are at risk for autism. Again, another kind of quick screening. 12 play-based items can be administered in 15 to 20 minutes, really used ideally for children from 24 to 36 months of age, but they do have a cut score for children who are below 24 months of age. We'll talk about that in a sec. And the DCES certification on the bottom indicates that we have providers in the state at each point of entry. So in our First Steps program, we have child evaluation specialists in each region of the state who are certified in giving the stat as a level 2 screening, which I think is another area in which the state's really ahead of some other states, making the effort. These DCESs have also all been through ADOS training. And so whereas the stat is a really specific screening measure for autism, the ADOS is considered gold standard diagnostic tool. And so we've built capacity across the state for these instruments. If we look at stat, again, quick, 12 items, looking at reciprocal play. There's communication items, looking at requesting, so pretty traditional kind of requesting. So if you put food in a jar, how does the child request that they want help? Bubbles, blow the bubbles, close the lid on the bubbles really tight, see how the child communicates they want to do it again. Directing attention, here's that skill we're looking at where you're trying to direct the child's attention to a play task, or you want the child to direct your attention. And then there are 4 motor imitation tasks. So quick, 12 items, pass, fail, or refused, scored based on the child's best performance. Okay, and again, easy scoring. So depending on the number of failures of those items, you get a score. For kids 24 to 36 months, score of 2 or above is considered at risk. The child should move on for a diagnostic evaluation. For children below that, again, who are between 2 and 3, routine developmental surveillance and tracking is recommended. But they do have a cut score of 2.75 for the children who are younger than 2. And so recommending that children under the age of 2 with a final score of 2.75 move on to evaluation. And so if we look at what those cut scores tell us, the concurrent validity with an autism diagnosis using the ADOS is high, 0.95. Positive predictive value of 0.86. And so pretty sensitive instrument, which is why the state is using it here to really determine which children move forward with that evaluation. In younger children, though, under 24 months, and that 2.75 cut score, there is the positive predictive value goes down, and it's not as specific to autism. It's still sensitive, meaning that it's sensitive to picking up children with developmental delays, but not as specific to determining autism or an autism spectrum disorder. And if you look at where the false positives are, you could assume it's children very young, 12, 13 months of age. It's hard to get a sense in children who are 12 to 13 months of age who have global developmental delay, filtering out some of these social communication behaviors. Okay. There is, on the Kentucky Autism Training Center website, a handouts and videos and PSA for Learn the Signs Act Early. So if we can share the web. Yeah, back to the websites.
That's right. My screen. Right there.
Same one, the resources.
Oh, that's right. I got you now. Okay. I'll get the technology yet. Sorry, gang. So on the Kentucky Autism Training Center website, there is an Act Early page that has great materials for all to use. And so there are developmental milestones from the Center for Disease Control. So at 6 months of age, these are the skills that babies should be presenting. And you can download the checklist and hand it to families. Here's that video glossary as well. So it's on this Act Early page as well. I think one of the interesting components as well is we had a grant, joint grant for the State Act Early team, and many of the materials that are available on the website are branded Kentucky, so they're branded UK, U of L, on the same sheet of paper, along with KDE and Voc Rehab. So there's multiple branding, public health. So you don't see that very often, but this is one of the efforts that kind of transcend any basketball rivalries or imaginary lines like I-65. So you'll have autism, fact sheets. There are developmental milestones brochures, all available to download, can be handed to families to show families how to track their child's development. So we think about growth a little differently when we're in this campaign and we're talking about development. I think at well check visits we often think about growth being physical growth, but instead we're thinking about development and watching children grow there. I think it's important to consider the family perspective, and I like this video. Walt tells me that there's a lot of early childhood providers who are with us today. And I think that in addition to us being healthcare and education providers, I really think we need to spend the time to really listen to families because they really know their child